Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matteo Beagle, content producer at TOC Worldwide, and welcome to Digital Day at TOC Europe. I am happy to introduce for this session Pat O'Leary, Head of Technology at PIMA, and Mr. Aman Kanan, CEO at TIL. So just so you know, in the case of an emergency, please make sure that you have located all emergency exits and please follow the instructions provided by our security staff. And please make sure that your phones are in silent mode to make sure that we keep the atmosphere for this session. Thank you very much. And Pat, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to see that there are some people here. I think Wednesday night traditionally is party night, so most people sitting in the audience on Thursday morning are bleary-eyed, so I'm very happy that some of you managed to make it to be with us this morning. The topic today is consideration for automation at container terminals. So it's really setting the scene for automation during today, and the various speakers during the day will address the subject. I think not many of you are as old as I am, but those of us who studied in the 70s, automation was the buzzword, and it was adopted very, very quickly in general production industry, and so on. Later on, in the 80s, early 90s, it moved into, let's say, heavier industry, particularly the automotive sector, and car production times dropped dramatically due to automation, and we wonder what sort of price we'd be paying for our cars nowadays had we not adopted automation. So therefore, it was quite a critical milestone in the development. I remember being here back in, I think it was 1989 at the TOC, where there was tremendous excitement. Automation was the buzzword. There were a few projects in the offing at the time, particularly Thamesport in the UK, which went on stream in, I think, 91, followed by ECT here in Rotterdam in 93. So they were the early runners, if you like, in the automation field. Strangely enough, following those two projects, there were very few further developments, and even looking today at the world automation map, there are quite a few more, obviously, than those two, but still nowhere close to major coverage. So there's still quite a low take-up on automation, which is a question that has to be asked and maybe answered somehow today as to why that is the case. Now, there are, of course, different levels of automation. People sometimes get confused. What is automation? Is it simply assisting a driver or improving a machine? But ultimately, automation means fully autonomous. The machine will work by itself, driven by a computer using artificial intelligence or whatever. So that is our ultimate target, and we want to get in that direction. We are now, as anybody who's been here for the last 2 days, I think we've heard the word digitalization probably 1,000 times. It was explored by almost every speaker. And I think the definition of digitalization should be brought back to mind in that it's the use of digital technology such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, augmented reality, big data, and so on, to change the business model and provide new value-producing opportunities. I think that's very important. So digitalization has to give us value. It's not doing it for the sake of doing it. It has to have a value. So as we heard again over the last few days, there are a myriad of technological developments out there which can assist the evolution of digitalization. But from the automation perspective, automation is effectively a subset of digitalization. So using all of these great technologies, they can be applied to effect automation. But I think that's very critical. Automation needs all of these components to succeed. And when people are investing in automation, the automation strategy, or the thought has to be, why are we doing this? And there are usually three top considerations: commercial considerations, obviously, technical considerations, and personnel. These are really the three parameters that people are looking at. And in order to justify a multi-billion or million investment, then the benefits in respect of productivity, the return on investment, sustainability, and of course on the labor force, and ultimately the bottom line has to be really the prime movers on that. our speaker this morning, and I should say at this stage, neither the speaker nor myself have any commercial interest in this show. We're not selling anything or producing anything, any of the two of us. So, but I'm sure he will address the issues that I just mentioned in more detail. So our speaker, which I'm delighted to introduce, is Amar Kanan. Amar is CEO of Terminal Investment Limited, TIL, one of the top 10 global investors and operators in the container terminal industry. TIL is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and is majority owned by MSC, the largest shipping line in the world, and also co-owned by Global Infrastructure Partners, GIP, out of New York, and GIC out of Singapore. Amar's experience in the container terminal industry and in the transportation field in general dates back to 1992, where he worked as a consultant and then as an entrepreneur and investor before taking on a leadership role at TIL. Amar has a master's degree from MIT, an engineering degree from AUB, and is currently living with his family in Geneva. So I think, without further ado, I hand you over to Amar for his insight into automation. Thank you, Amar.
Good morning, and thank you for coming to listen to me. I think when we think of automation, at least at TIL, we are very conscious that we're not going to do it, or we wouldn't be investing in automation to improve productivity, because today that's not what automation is delivering. Obviously, there are cost implications if unions allow you. But for us, when we think of automation, the most important consideration is reliability. Because automated terminals are more reliable than ones that are not. Unfortunately, I say that, because of the state of labor we live in. Our investment plan for the next 20 years involves some sort of automation for every brownfield or greenfield investment that we're planning. But having said that, we're also very conscious of the challenges and the considerations that we need to be addressing in and before we automate. I will talk about 3 of those, and then I will jump to another subject that Pat would like me to talk about, which is also digitization in general in our industry, and I'll say a few words about that. So the 3 topics of consideration, the 3 topics that matter to us, the 3 topics that we found to be challenging are integration, the commercial relationship between the supplier of the system and the operator, and third is obviously the relationship with labor. And in my view, the easiest one to tackle is integration. It's a fact that today we cannot go and solicit or procure an automated system from just a single supplier. And no matter how you package it, and whether you buy the software from the same company that owns the crane division, you still have to go through a lot of pains to integrate the system and to have it work. And we're going through that. We're going through that in real time. And that's a challenge that's not surprising. And it will continue to evolve. I think the industry would benefit from services, from service providers that offer to come and help operators like us integrate the different components and make them work. I came from a different transportation industry. In the 90s, I worked on surface transportation, and I worked on systems in an area called intelligent transport systems. So, today your travel time on Google, I used to work on those systems back in the 90s, and we had the same issues. It's integrating the different components. But unlike our industry, they have service providers, companies that act as integrators. And we find that our industry lacks that. So that's something that I would like to see our industry offer, is to have service providers to come and help operators like us put everything together. And as I said, that challenge, in my view, is the easiest of the three. It's normal, it's expected, it looks painful, but eventually the components will be put together and they will eventually work. The more interesting challenge is, in my view, the challenge of the relationship between the software and system providers and the operator investor. The historic relationship is one where we would buy the license and we'd have an agreement for maintenance over the long term. But the risk remained with the operator. And I think as we now evolve that, and as the TOS has evolved into a full-fledged automated system, that relationship has to change. It cannot continue to be one where we buy the license and we pay a maintenance fee per year. Because effectively, in an automated terminal, the system provider becomes your operating partner. You can do nothing without that system provider. It used to be the case with the TOS, but it's more exaggerated now, right? I always give the simple example. When I started with TIL, one of our terminals was underperforming, and I sent a team to that terminal. It's a manually operated terminal, and within 3 months, we reorganized the process. We reorganized the yard, where we put empties, where we put imports. We energized the workforce by incentivizing them. And we managed to bring up the productivity from high teens to high 20s per crane. Imagine if that terminal was automated. It would take me 6 months to negotiate with the system supplier to change the process and modify the system and have access to the system so that I can make and implement the changes. And there's no one to incentivize. I cannot go and incentivize labor and management because there's no labor. So effectively, if you think about it, us as terminal operators, we take on two risks effectively. We take on the risk of business, so we forecast demand and we say, well, that's how many boxes we're gonna handle, and we're going to make the investment accordingly. And we take on the risk of operation, of making sure that we offer a productive service to the customers. In an automated terminal, effectively, we're carrying that risk of operation, but don't have the tools. We're handcuffed. We are basically at the mercy of the supplier of the system to be able to effect any improvement and any changes. And I think, the industry is not picking up on that issue. Maybe I'm wrong in my judgment that this is a big issue, and probably I am. But I think that that relationship needs to change. The supplier needs to accept and realize that there is some risk that they need to take and that they should become true commercial partners. So there's a license, maybe fee or license, payment, but then instead of a management or maintenance agreement that is fixed per year based on whatever, then they get paid per productive move. Because if the move is not productive, then they need to be a partner as well in taking on the liability of making that move productive. There's one person in the audience that agrees with me, and we had this discussion 4 years ago. But this is something that I announce here in front of all of you, that TIL is willing to be very forward-thinking and innovative to work with any supplier who's willing to partner with us on transforming our industry so that that relationship evolves and becomes a meaningful one in the future. And then the third, I'm told I should use slides, so I have to click the slides. The third challenge is obviously the one that relates to labor and the impact on labor. And I think that, you know, we're dealing with this issue. We're dealing with it in real time as well, in the West Coast negotiations that are taking place now. Moffitt and Nickel have helped us work out our development project in Long Beach, which involves automation. And there I think that there are, again, the two parties, both the operators and labor, have to recognize the middle ground that will take us forward. I think we need to recognize as operators that automating for the pure sake of cost saving is not going to be successful in the future. We've got to accept that this cannot be the driving motivation. The driving motivation has to be reliability. But when you think about this landscape of today, when you think about, you know, the limitations in terms of how much we can fill the water, the limitations on how much more land we can get to grow capacity, you very quickly realize that in more than what you think of your terminal portfolio, the only way to add more capacity is to densify. And so densification has to be the motivation. That with automation, you can go higher in the yard, you can have larger cranes that can be remotely controlled, and you can densify. And when you densify the same footprint, that means you're doing more with the same environmental impact, and so you are effectively winning on both ends of the spectrum. And for labor, when you densify, you don't necessarily lose in terms of the total count. You may not add a lot more, but you don't lose. So we found out that the model that works best in terms of a relationship with labor, who will continue to be partners in this, is a model that focuses on densification rather than cost reduction. You densify your footprint, you do 2 or 3 times more than what you do. Of course, per box, you're going to need less labor, but overall, you know, labor will not lose. They will become part of the future instead of being, you know, alienated and fighting that future. They will have better jobs sitting in a control room rather than, you know, up on a crane in a very uncomfortable position. And I think that is what I've been advocating for the industry to adopt. And I have, over the past many months, made that same argument in the US, where, you know, these negotiations with labor are ongoing now, that, you know, we have to be part of the future. We cannot fight automation. Automation is reality. But we have to do it in such a way that helps us achieve what matters to us as operator and helps us maintain at least the same level of total employment for labor as they have today. I think that's the win-win model that will take us forward in terms of this challenge of getting labor to accept automation. So those are the 3 considerations and challenges that for us are very important to address, and very important to consider as we make the investment and make the decision to invest in any automation in our terminals. So the second topic that I'd like to briefly talk about is the topic of digitization. And Of course, today it's a big buzzword, everybody talking about digitization of the supply chain. And I think, sometimes I listen to people talk about it, I read articles, and I ask myself, what are we trying to achieve, right? I mean, sometimes there's a bit of, the means becomes the end. I come from an operating background. I used to operate terminals, so I keep it simple. I think the most effective application of any digitization of our industry is one that allows us to be more efficient. And in a container terminal, to be more efficient means you reduce unproductive moves. That's what I know. And to reduce unproductive moves, you have to have information. You have to have information about the box. Because you're discharging the box, you're stacking it, and then you're going to have to perform 5 or 6 or 4 unproductive moves to deliver it when the customer sends the truck to be taking the box, or when you need to put it on rail or on a barge. And the problem is that information is missing. If we know, before discharging the box from the ship, when approximately, which day it will be picked up, and approximately whether in the morning or in the afternoon, then that kind of information would help us optimize the location of the box in the yard. And if we can do that, we can then reduce those unproductive moves, which means you reduce costs, you reduce time, you reduce environmental impact, and you become more efficient. And I think, in my view, this is what the industry should focus on. That information, that information about, well, the box is coming, when do we believe it's going to be going out, and can we get that information at the terminal level and use it in a digitized format to forecast a delivery time, and use that before it's discharged to locate it in the optimal location in the yard so that we use the space that we have in the most efficient way. I'm sure there are many other applications, but my point is we have to, in digitization, we can go have a strategic plan that will take us to the moon, and a very logical step-by-step that says, well, step 1, we have to have, make sure that the data uses the same, is synchronized, is interoperable, et cetera, and then step 2, whatever, and this is the grand picture. But that'll take 15 years. I know, I come from that industry. What I'm advocating for is let's pick one subject that will have immediate impact. We tackle it, we show that it works, and then we'll rally more support around digitization because we have an early success, we have a quick win. And I advocate, again, to the crowd that this is the most important, to reduce unproductive moves in the yard. So that's what I have to say, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you for coming here this morning, and
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amar. I think that was very enlightening, and as usual, very pragmatic advice from somebody with years of experience in the industry, and I think practical advice as well. I will just kick off with a question before I ask you to do. I think the elephant in the room has always been the labor issue, and I think your approach and what you're considering, as a presentation to labor, that by intensifying in the yard, that labor will not be affected. I tend to be a bit skeptical. I'm listening, and it sounds great, but if you do have a lot of operatives on the ground, crane operators, checkers, all of that. You feel that by intensifying, you will increase the throughput by a volume that will justify the existing staff, or can justify the existing staff?
Well, I mean, obviously the assumption here is not to go for full automation.
Okay.
Right? So you have to keep some functions manually operated for my statement to make sense. So I'm not someone today that's advocating full automation. There are needed automation elements, the densification of the yard, automating the yard, remote control of the key cranes. Those are important to automate to achieve the reliability and the density that I've talked about. But obviously, yes, for the numbers to work, you'd have to leave many of the other elements manually operated. And we've made the numbers work. We have, I'm speaking out of experience on very recent investment projects where we've made the numbers work. You densify, you automate the yard, you do remote control of the key cranes, and you get 3 times the capacity, and at the same time you don't lose a job.
No, it's an interesting concept. I think you mentioned capacity, and I suppose the famous word always is throughput. And I'm still, even at my age, still find it hard to understand. Having commissioned cranes back in the late 70s and 80s, we had ship containers per hour times even then of 28, 29 per hour. Now we're in 2022, and we're still happy is probably not the word, but still working with the same container numbers. Now, I was interested in the fact that you did not address the actual moves per hour per ship. You didn't seem to be concerned about that, which is quite an interesting one, because that tends to be always the topic of conversation. Can we improve or increase the number of containers per ship? And as I say, if I look at where we've come from, it hasn't increased over 40 years. So I'm interested in that you're not quite bothered about that.
Yeah, well, as I said before, I don't think automation will bring you higher productivity.
Right.
But that's why I'm advocating not for full automation, because today full automation will drop the productivity. So you keep the key cranes remotely controlled, you automate the yard, and you can go either way on the horizontal transport. And today we know where the problems come from in terms of productivity.
So problems always in the yard, or in the logistics in the yard. So that's quite an interesting observation. I'll throw it open to the floor. I can ask a few more questions later. Who would like to ask Amar something?
Günter Schmidtmeyer, hello. Amar, question, you said you expect risk sharing, but most of those systems players or the non-existent integrators are very small compared to TIL, MSC. So risk sharing as in penalty, would that kill some of them immediately? How would you see the risk sharing that it could work? And at the same token, the risk sharing in a positive way, how far would you be going there?
Yeah. Look, let me, before answering that question, if we don't find that the industry is interested in such a partnership, in changing the commercial model, and I'm not just speaking about us, I've had those discussions with peers in the market, the options in front of us is to make investments in having our own system, right? Because you need that control. You need to have, so either my partner in automation is motivated to help me operate productively and efficiently, or I've got to take that risk in-house and have my own system, which comes with a million issues. We're not a technology company. We will always be less economical, because no matter how many terminals we own, we're never going to be at a scale where we can compete with the current providers, right? Well, we recognize that, but there's a cost to everything. So that's the heading, that's the direction we would head if we're forced to. We don't want to go in that direction. And the kind of risk sharing would be something that would be balanced, right? You don't. For us, it's important that if you're the software supplier, the system supplier, you are motivated to have that system produce, productively. It's not an easy commercial relationship, because there are so many interdependency. You're going to tell me, fine. Instead of getting a maintenance fee or instead of getting the license fee, I'm happy to get paid $50 per move if the move is done above 28 moves per hour per crane. But then you're going to come and tell me, well, what about power? You're responsible for power, so if there's a power cut, it's my problem. What about procurement? What about? So it's not easy. I'm not saying this is something we sit down and overnight we can come up with a commercial model. It's very complicated. But what I'm saying is, if we don't get there, you're going to see that operators, as we get into the era of automation, that operators will make then their own investment in their own systems. That's my prediction.
Edgar Pineda. When you mentioned, Amar, about the problem to the problem to fix the inefficient moves within the terminal, and I think that has to do a lot with planning, yard planning and berth planning, right? But the main factor that affects that are the vessels, how they come, how they're stowage, and so. Two questions. First, do you see that the network of information will get integrated, so we will have that information way in advance, and perhaps being able to adapt that to make our terminal better operationally? And second, do you think that the automation is going even further than just being operators, but actually to the planning and start putting artificial intelligence in there?
Look, what I'm saying is, obviously today there's a big push, right? You've heard the US administration is now getting involved in this. They launched this initiative. So everybody is trying to do something. And that's the solution for our supply chain problem. And I'm very happy to hear that. But what I'm saying is, folks, let's just sort of identify one specific problem we're trying to solve and focus the energy of the effort on that. If I'm to vote, my vote would be, let's reduce unproductive moves, and the way to do it is to have information about the delivery of that container. That's all, right? Because today you look at and you hear what's going on, and we're going to the moon with digitization, which is great. But that's going to be post my retirement. And I'm saying, if we're going to do something in the next year, let's focus on one thing. And then we build it up. I know this is not the most efficient way. I know systems engineers have a very methodical way. First, we've got to make sure that the data uses the same sort of format. Sure. But then that becomes academic.
Yeah, it's Stefan Wiech from Lux. Thank you very much for your insights. I have a question. You mentioned in digitalization, focusing on one issue in order to optimize the existing traditional business model in handling containers. Are you also looking into digital business models in a way using the data you collect to in a way enhance or create new business models, new clients with digital services?
Well, it's not our business, obviously, because we'll be intruding on others' businesses. So we're not doing that, but we're doing other things. I mean, one of the initiatives we are working on is using data from the portfolio of terminals relating to the behavior of our equipment and trying to be more proactive about replacement of equipment, right? Because today we replace equipment when either the book says you have to replace it or when there's a serious breakdown that it doesn't make sense to repair it. But in fact, if you look carefully at the data and you get the variety of data, you see that for whatever reason, some RTGs, which may be newer than others, consume more energy and require more maintenance than older ones. And in fact, when you do the math, it's replacing them earlier makes more sense. And so we're using, that objective. We're collecting that data. We're trying to be more proactive about, the replacement of equipment. We're also using data in terms of trying to manage labor. And we're trying to get out of the usual sort of shift system and how many people you deploy per shift, etc., and looking at forecasting behavior and many other applications. But we're not in the business of trying to offer. We're not in logistics. We're not in door-to-door. So we'd like to just focus on making sure the terminal works well.
Mark Steve Bolt from T-Mike. Appreciate your talk and the comments on how the commercial relationships have to change, and interested in your perspectives on how you foresee the intellectual property ownership changing as those software providers look to be able to work across multiple port operators, yet the port operators look for that unique implementation of a software solution to provide them a unique operating advantage.
Look, I don't believe, and this is a very pragmatic view on this, which many of my colleagues don't agree on. I don't believe any operator will ever gain special advantage from having special systems. It's all how we manage the business. At the end of the day, whatever intellectual property that we can negotiate with you about a special module that gives us some ability to be a bit more productive is going to be out in the market in a few years, and I don't worry about that.
Venki from Nokia. So we come in the whole connectivity and infrastructure space. One aspect that we have seen when it comes to digitalization, you have companies building the digitalization strategy globally, and then the local terminals have their different realities. So how do you guys ensure that, let's say, the digitalization strategy of blockchains or automation, how do you ensure that to the last mile of every terminal, which has a very different DNA or a local reality, how do you roll out digitalization to each and every diverse terminal? Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. We've thought about that question because, even if we own the terminals 100%, you want the local management to be empowered. And maybe half of our terminals, we have partners. Okay? So the way we're doing it is we're building what we're calling a middleware at the holding level. And that's where that's where data comes in, and that's where we are going to have our special and smart modules. Okay? And we are offering that in the future to the terminals. They can decide to use it, they can decide not to. So it's not forced on them. But then, if they're not productive, I'll have another discussion with them. Right?
Hi, Guus Janssen from Siemens. I have one question about the commercial concept that you talked about. And I would like to hear your view on this performance-based contracting that you're aiming at, I guess, and how modular you see that. And for example, on maintenance, on the mechanical part, on the electrical part, on automation systems, because you have multiple suppliers that will have a hard time, as you said, very complex in getting these KPIs right that they can commit to.
Look, I honestly don't have a good answer. So as I said before, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very complex. But what I'm saying is we have to make an effort to see if this kind of a commercial relationship works. Because even if you're not hearing it from our competitors, at some point, no operator will give up the control of the operations and be at the mercy of a supplier. Today, most of operators, the majority of their terminals are still not automated. So that issue is still not high on the agenda. But I can tell you, in the next 20 years, most of the terminals will become, one way or another, semi-automated. And so that issue will rise. And I'm saying, let's be ahead of it and try to find a solution. And the operators have the capability. I mean, you know that. We can buy a systems company. and have it just serve us. And it becomes, yeah, a cost center, but we have the ability to do that. We have the ability to make that investment. It's not the smartest way to move forward, not for us, but if we have to, I mean, we'll do it.
Anybody else? A question from my side. I detected in your presentation there, especially when you talked about the integration path, a certain frustration with a multiplicity of integration systems and interface systems between equipment, between yards. Do you see, or should there be, let's say, in the industry, a drive to standardize that whole interface, basically from source right to consignee? That there should be a standard protocol or a language or something that would follow everybody on the same page. Would that make sense?
Absolutely. This is the only way to go.
But at the moment, we have even this week, I'm sure you've heard that various ports. Here in Rotterdam, they had a really, I think, very good presentation on what Rotterdam Port itself was doing with its own systems, but it was very unique to Rotterdam. Equally, I think, in Algeciras had something. So it seems at the moment it's all disparate operations. So I think that there has to be, in my view, some way of tying all this together on a common platform. And I always go up to the basis of when you open your cell phone, you're the client, you have an app, you address a server somewhere, but everybody is speaking on HTTP language. It's a standard language right across the board. There's no miscommunication. So I can have the same message on my phone in Ireland as you can have in Geneva. That seems to me to be missing, and I'd be interested if somebody in the audience would have any comment on that, and also yourself, Amar.
No, I mean, no, it's a no-brainer. This is the way it should be. But unfortunately, we're not there yet.
No, and nobody down there has a solution on that. It would be quite an interesting one, I think, to explore. I'm challenging you now, but nobody is. Paul, you should say something over there on that one, if you don't mind.
Well, Pat, I think going back 3 or 4 years, we had discussions on that stage about how the industry tackles that, and there have been some good steps. We've got the DCSA, HEMA's doing things to drive standardization, and I think it's moving forward at a pace that is faster than people thought when it started. It's a big challenge. You have to sort of eat this elephant one bite at a time. But we're hearing people talking now about even replacing EDI with the APIs if there can be agreement on some basic formats. So I think the industry will get there by necessity, and part of that necessity is there's some very aged technology still in use, like EDI, that are past their best by date, and some of the driving factors, like there's nobody around who's learning it and can work with it, and it's very expensive. That will push the industry forward faster. So I think it's happening, but maybe not quite at the pace.
It is. Very good. Thank you, Paul, for that. Very good. Any other queries or questions for Amar? No. Very good. So I think we learned quite a bit this morning. I think the three, again, very pragmatic approach by Amar to the issues. I'm sort of personally a little bit disappointed in that Amar is saying he doesn't see full automation as being on the horizon quite yet. I thought by the end of my career that there would be automated cranes, and I know that some companies are now working on the final stages of STS full automation. From what I get today, it's not really wanted in the industry, so that's something that we'll have to digest from Amar. But again, I think it's good to listen to the practical approach on the ground, because, like you said, it's fine to aim for the stars, but if it doesn't give us any benefit and there's no long-term benefit, then we have to be a bit more sensible in that. So Amar, thank you so much for your enlightened presentation, and thank you very much for coming and for the questions this morning. Thank you.